TV7 Israel News is made possible thanks to your generous donations.
Shalom, good evening. This is TV7 Israel News broadcast to you from Jerusalem. Israel warns the Islamist Hamas of the IDF's plans to intensify its offensive unless the Palestinian terror group releases the 59 hostages from captivity. The Iranian-proxy Ansar-Allah, which is dominated by the Houthi tribe, launched 2 ballistic missiles toward Israel earlier today. U.S. President Donald Trump pledges a lengthy campaign to eradicate the Houthi terrorists. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his political rivals clashed publicly yesterday at a heated plenary session that was called for by the opposition. Formally, the plenary session was called to deliberate the rising tide of crime in Arab society. However, the focus rapidly shifted to the fate of Israeli democracy, Israel's state of war, the hostages, and the government's priorities, performance, and perceived successes and failures.
We are determined to achieve all of the war objectives, to eliminate Hamas governing and military capabilities, to return all of the hostages, to guarantee that Gaza does no longer constitute a threat to Israel, and to return our displaced residents back to their homes safely.
With the opposition repeatedly voicing outrage over the 59 hostages who remain in Hamas captivity, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pushed back at allegations which claim that he and his governing coalition were not doing enough.
Up to today, we have returned 196 hostages, from them 147 alive. We are committed to return everyone, without exceptions. I want to remind you the fact that the member of parliament who exited the plenum doesn't want to remember. This is the fact. In contrast to what has been said, at the start of the war there were those who said, including someone very, very senior in the top security brass, he said that we need to accept the fact that we won't be able to return even one hostage. However, members of Knesset Hila Gamliel, Avi Dichter, you sat there and you heard it. But I believe differently. I believe differently, and I insisted on a different approach. I believe that thanks to the combination of our brave warriors and calculated decisions that we would take, meaning thanks to the combination of military and political pressures, we would succeed. We have done a lot, but we have not yet completed the task. I reiterate, we are determined to return all of those hostages who remain.
The Israeli premier also addressed a new phenomenon in the Gaza Strip, which spontaneously erupted in the northern part of the enclave in the town of Beit Lahia and quickly spread to other towns in the Palestinian enclave, in which scores of Palestinians are starting to protest against the Islamist Hamas, calling for an end to the tyranny of the offshoot organization of the Muslim Brotherhood.
In recent days, we saw another change. We saw something that we've never seen before. We saw large, open demonstrations in the Gaza Strip against Hamas rule. We've already seen many pro-Hamas demonstrations. We saw them in European capitals and campuses in the U.S., but demonstrations like these in Gaza against Hamas, such a thing we haven't seen. More and more Gazans understand that Hamas brings destruction and doom upon them, and it is important. All this shows that our policy is working.
It is important to highlight that the anti-Hamas protests, which began in the towns of Beit Lahia and then in Jabalia, has now spread to at least a dozen towns and villages throughout the terror-ridden territory. Meanwhile, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz addressed the residents of Gaza once again, stressing that unless Hamas succumbs to Israel's demands, the Gaza Strip will face the full force of the IDF.
Residents of Gaza, the IDF will soon operate in force in additional areas of Gaza, and you will be required to evaluate for your own protection from the combat zones. The plans are already prepared and approved. Hamas is endangering your lives and will cause you to lose your homes and more territory that will be added to the Israeli security system. The first sin war destroyed Gaza, and the second sin war willing to burn with his own hands half of Gaza merely to attempt to preserve the corrupt governance of his and his friends, the murderers and rapists of Hamas. They and their families reside safely in tunnels or luxury hotels with bank accounts that contain billions in foreign banks, and they are using you as hostages. Learn from the residents of Beit Lahiya. Just like they have done, you should also demand the expulsion of Hamas from Gaza and the immediate release of all of the Israeli hostages. This is the only path towards ending the war.
Meanwhile, at approximately 1 o'clock earlier this afternoon, rocket alert sirens sounded throughout much of central Israel, to include both Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and their respective surrounding areas. According to the IDF spokesperson's unit, the Iranian-proxy Ansar-Allah, which is dominated by the Houthi tribe, had launched 2 ballistic missiles in the direction of the State of Israel. The statement noted that the 2 missiles launched from Yemen were intercepted prior to crossing into Israeli territory, with no injuries or damage reported. The IDF further stated that the sirens were sounded in accordance with protocol. It is important to highlight that the efforts by the Houthis to launch ballistic missiles towards Israel daily is effectively an act of desperation, as U.S. Central Command is effectively pounding at the Iranian-supported terror organization.
United States forces successfully struck dozens of targets across Houthi-controlled territory. And as a result of these actions, several Houthi leaders were killed, including the Houthi drone chief, his deputy, and several of their drone experts and other key leaders. We also destroyed command and controlled facilities, weapons manufacturing facilities, and advanced weapons storage locations. And it's important to remember why this powerful action took place in the first place.
The White House press secretary went on to highlight that the first act by the U.S. State Department under the previous administration was the decision by President Biden and former Secretary of State Antony Blinken to remove the so-called Houthis from the designation list of foreign terrorist organizations in the United States, a move that had emboldened the Houthis in Yemen and their masters in Tehran.
The Houthis targeted U.S. military ships and aircraft, hit commercial ships, including U.S.-flagged vessels, threatened our personnel overseas, and attacked our allies in the region. This resulted in more than a year of U.S.-flagged commercial ships being prevented from safely sailing through the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, and the Gulf of Aden. This had a massive negative impact on global trade of the economic security of the United States.
While the Biden administration instructed the deployment of U.S. naval vessels into the region, U.S. Central Command and its marine component, NAVCENT, gained a limited mandate to defend freedom of navigation in the strategic Strait of Bab el-Mandeb and adjacent waterways. Moreover, CENTCOM was granted a green light to launch preemptive strikes against field and munitions. However, this was not enough, triggering frustration amongst the leadership of the U.S. military and the Central Command area of responsibility, with CENTCOM Commander General Michael Eric Kurilla and Deputy Commander Admiral Bradford Cooper urging for a change of policy. Nevertheless, the change of policy towards the Houthis, despite hundreds of attacks against the United States to include its naval and commercial assets as well as its regional allies, was not changed under the Biden administration.
Joe Biden was the commander-in-chief, and he sat on his hands while the United States of America was bullied and embarrassed by terrorists. President Trump and his team are putting a stop to these threats in restoring American strength around the world. The Trump peace through strength approach means no terrorist force will stop American commercial and naval vessels from freely sailing the waterways of the world.
During remarks delivered on the latest American auto tariffs, President Trump addressed the military campaign against the Houthis, committing to a lengthy campaign.
They have been hit harder than they've ever been hit, and they want us to stop so badly. And they've got to stop. They've got to say no mas. But I can only say that the attacks, it's attacks every day, every night. It's not just the one, you're talking about one. The attacks have been very successful, even beyond our wildest expectations. We've hit them very hard, very successfully. And we're going to do it for a long time. We're going to keep it going for a long time.
It is important to re-emphasize that the Houthis are an Iranian proxy and subject to Iranian strategy. And according to the 2025 annual threat assessment of the U.S. intelligence community that was addressed at length in a hearing at the Senate Committee on Intelligence yesterday, the Islamic Republic of Iran will likely continue its efforts to counter Israel and press for a U.S. military withdrawal from the region unless something is done about it.
Iran will likely continue efforts to counter Israel and press for U.S. military withdrawal from the region by aiding, arming, and helping to reconstitute its loose consortium of like-minded terrorists and militant actors, which it refers to as its axis of resistance. Although weakened, this collection of actors still presents a wide range of threats, including to Israel's population, U.S. forces deployed in Iraq and Syria, and to U.S. and international military and commercial shipping and transit.
Thank you for watching TV7 Israel News. I would like to thank TV7's family of viewers who were instrumental in proactively backing TV7 Israel's continuity of productions. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem and salvation of Israel. Jonathan Hassan wishing you an Erev Mevorach, and God willing, we will see you during our next update. Until then, Shalom from Jerusalem.